All right, so today we're going to talk about the Cold War. As you see in the picture here, that's the alternative if we don't solve things peacefully. We had made a conscious effort during World War II to rely on technology, and that is something we do to this day. Instead of manpower strategy, we combine in our modern day military, we combine all of these aspects, but we really do push the technology envelope, and it starts with the Manhattan Project and the atom bomb. So go back real quick, and we need to review these conferences. The big three: Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin planned. They met to plan the war in Tehran, Iran. The Yalta Conference, also here, as you see, they continue planning the war and start looking at how the war is going to end. That's the middle picture. And at the bottom, the big three change a little. You have the Potsdam Conference. Truman, who does not trust Stalin. Remember, we talked about FDR briefly, how he didn't see the Soviet Union as a threat. Truman does. So we have Truman, Attlee, and Stalin, bottom picture. And as I told you guys before, Truman learns of the atom bomb en route to Potsdam, but he does not tell Stalin, an ally during World War II. However, Stalin found out. He had spies in the Manhattan Project, so he knows. So after World War II, we see a global reorganization and reconstruction. Basically, World War II will be an end to imperialism. Imperialism will die out throughout the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and it resurfaces in a different form. But we're going to see Britain and France not be the leaders of the world anymore. It will be the U.S., and of course, the second nation to come out of this would be the Soviet Union. And here are some differing philosophies that you need to know. The U.S. believes in a democratic form of government. We believe in economic stability. It would keep the world, we believe in economic stability would keep peace in the world, not world. We believe the free enterprise system was a necessity for economic growth, and underline this one. We want to reunify Germany within 3 to 5 years. So in other words, our peace is going to be based on conflict resolution, not conflict termination, and we want to see Germany reunited and become a strong and vital member of the world community. Reunified in a democratic form, by the way. Reasons for distrust. Reasons we're going to distrust the Soviets. They signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler. So we look at this and say, wait a minute, you signed a treaty with our enemy. Also, we did not know Stalin's intentions in Eastern Europe. He promised they would have free elections. He kept promising this stuff to us, and then he never delivered it. There is never a free election, and it ends up Soviet or communist parties are going to take control in each of these Eastern Bloc countries. So Stalin has a reason for this. And we even know the reason for it, but Truman, once again, the way he handles it, he fears communism and he fears Stalin. So, Soviet Union, they believed in a communistic form of government. They believed workers revolting and striking against business owners taking control of government was a good thing, and they wanted the workers to begin control. That was the whole point of their revolution, to topple the nobility and the elite class. They wanted to control countries between Russia and Germany. They wanted to create a buffer zone. Stalin may be crazy, he may be a monster, but he's not stupid. In that he lost 29 million Russians in 2 wars to Germany, World War I and World War II. The Russians lost 2 million people in World War I, the most of any country, and they lose about 27 million in World War II, the most of any country. So he wants a buffer zone between Germany and his homeland Russia, because Russians lose a lot of people to Germans. So in 27 years, 29 million dead, over 29 million dead, he's not off base there. Germany as far as Germany, as far as Stalin was concerned, he wants to keep Germany divided and weak forever. In other words, he does not want Germany reunified. He wants to actually call them a different name, and he does not ever want to see Germany reunited again because, once again, right at 27 million or 29 million dead in 27 years, he does not trust Germany for good reasons. Now, reasons that he would distrust the U.S. We always look and say, well, the Soviets distrust us, and we don't know why they would distrust us at all. Well, it took us 4 years to open a Western Front in France, and he was begging for us to open a Western Front in 1942, 1941, 1940. He was begging for the U.S. to get involved and Britain to invade France from the west to open up a second front so Hitler would not be able to concentrate all of his troops in Russia. We didn't do that until 1944. As a matter of fact, he begged us to open a second front in 1943, and instead of doing that in France, we went into Italy, the soft underbelly, as Churchill called it. It took us 16 years to recognize the Soviet Union as a nation. We didn't recognize them as a nation from 1918 to 1933. 1917, 1933. We don't recognize them as a nation. The first president to recognize them as a nation in his very first year as president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So here's some of the areas you can look at the Cold War influencing. And if you see here, the Cold War is a competition in space, arms, weapons, influence, competition, distrust one another, fear, movies, paranoia, and athletics. These are all areas where we're going to see the Cold War play out throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Oh, yeah, and of course, indirect wars like Korea and Vietnam. So what is the Iron Curtain? Former Prime Minister of Britain comes over to Missouri. He gives a speech at a commencement, a college commencement in the spring of 1946, and he proclaimed an Iron Curtain had descended upon Europe. What was the Cold War's true definition, like if on your test and in the future, what you need to know the Cold War in general definition is? It's a competition for world influence between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. In other words, think of it as a big popularity contest. And we tried to get as many people on our side, and the Soviet Union tried to get as many people on their side. We wanted as many countries to join us as we could, and the Soviet Union wanted that as well. It's a very expensive competition. I believe it costs us in the neighborhood of 12 to 20-something $trillion over the years. So it was not cheap, and it actually bankrupts the Soviet Union. So here's a popular or famous picture or political cartoon. So peep under the Iron Curtain. Think about it. Who would be Joe? Written no admittance by Joe, by the order of Joe. Who would Joe be? What parts of Europe are sealed off? And what does the wall symbolize? And of course, if you look down at the bottom, the guy with the cigar peeping under the wall, who would that be? So, post-war Europe. If you look here, U.S., France, Britain, from the West, and the Soviet Union controls the eastern part of Europe, the eastern part of Western Europe. So, Germany and Berlin are going to be split. We split Germany per the Potsdam Conference into 4 sections. You have the British section, you have the American section, the French section, and the Soviet section. If that sounds familiar, yes, they're all the Allies. We also split Berlin into 4 sections. And if you look, yes, the Soviet Union usually gets the eastern side, but you see France, Britain, and the U.S. on the western part of Berlin, and the Soviet Union on the eastern part. Keep in mind, Berlin's about 150 miles inside of East Germany. So in other words, you got to drive 150 miles through the Soviet-controlled land to get to Berlin. There's some more occupied zones pictures. This telegram right here is one of the most important telegrams of the Cold War, and it happens, I believe, in 1946. Yeah, February 22nd, 1946. This is a letter from a U.S. diplomat. His name is George Kennan. It's called the Long Telegram because, quite honestly, it was extremely long for a telegram. It basically led to our policy of containment. You need to know that. The long telegram leads to our policy of containment. This policy is suggested by George Kennan, and it's basically to keep communism within its present territory, to contain it. Kennan said the Russians were concerned about invasions from the West and wanted a buffer zone, just what we talked about earlier. He lets Truman know this as early as February 1946. And we want to stop the spread of a worldwide communist revolution. In this telegram, he also outlines we need to treat the Soviets and we need to treat the world as more of an empire. And we need to become like the world's leading power. And he goes through it and blueprints why. And basically we had, I think, 5% of the world's wealth, or 10% of the world's wealth, and we're using up right at 40% of all the goods in the world. And so we need to control our assets. So that's something if you want to go and look at on your own, but it basically sets our foreign policy up to where we use parts of it today. Definitely it explains why we get involved in some areas of the world, and you want to know why and all of that good stuff. We're going to focus on containment for the next 21 years, but when you start looking at the American empire that goes through the 21st century, you can look at this telegram as well, and you can understand a little bit more about why we do things the way we do. Back to the notes. So out of his long telegram, this sets up the Truman Doctrine, March 12, 1947, because Greece and Turkey are fighting Soviet aggression. Basically, they have communist movements in these nations post-World War II. And the U.S. would send over $400 million in financial aid to support democratic regimes. In other words, to defeat the communists. And this will establish our policy of containment. If you want to check the video out, it explains containment right there. It's a short video. The Marshall Plan comes up the very next year. George Marshall, we didn't even talk about him much in our World War II segment, but he is the general in control of all the other generals of World War II. He's a chief of staff, or excuse me, he is a joint chief general, and he's in control of all of World War II, and he actually places all the generals throughout the world to leads to our success. As you see here, he becomes Secretary of State. He retires. And to aid any European country to help rebuild their economy, where the U.S. is going to offer them money. The purpose is to limit the attempts of communists in Europe. Only Western European countries accepted to help. And in exchange, if you accept help from the U.S., you have to drop all trade barriers with the U.S. And we wanted free trade. We spent about $13 billion in 1950s money to rebuild Western Europe from 1948 to 1952. So in other words, we helped destroy all of Europe, and then we spend the money and we rebuild it. And you say, well, why would we do that? Because we would have free trade with them. Every economic sector in the world, every industrial section in the world was destroyed except for ours. So it sets us up for 25 years of unequaled economic growth, and we actually earned back that $13 billion within 1955, I believe. So it was actually an ingenious move. But why wouldn't the Soviets join this? Why wouldn't Stalin join this? Because of Westernization. He understood the trick. So we'll pick up with this on the next part.